Welcome back to Gems Podcast. I'm the founder and host, Miss Genesis Amaris Kemp, and my special guest with me is Bob DePasquale. And here is a bit about Bob. Everyone has gifts and skills to make the world a better place. We should be radically generous with what we have in order to improve the lives of others. The more stories we share about giving, the better place the world will be. How can we empower people to take action with the causes they feel passionate about? Bob had a terrible experience with life-threatening illness and terrorism at age 18. It took months to recover physically and mentally, but years to find himself emotionally. Since that time, Bob has dedicated his life using what he has for good. Everyone deserves to experience the joy of giving. So, on that note, Bob and I are going to interweave his struggle of dealing with cancer and beating it, and then how he weaves that into some of the work that he's doing today through philanthropy and giving. So, without further ado, please welcome Bob DePasquale to Gems Podcast.
Hey, Genesis. I am excited to be here. Love the name of it, the podcast, by the way, Gems. That makes me think of beautiful things, exciting messages, and great conversations. So thanks for having me. I'm excited. I can't wait to dive in.
My pleasure, Bob. So I'm going to give you two options up front. So we could either do a rapid fire game at the end, or we could break the ice in the beginning. What would you like to do?
Let's do it right now. Let's shoot me, rapid fire me. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're doing our rapid fire game in the beginning versus the end. So
Cool.
Number one, favorite book.
The Bible.
Number two, favorite color.
Red.
Number three, dream car.
Lamborghini.
Oh, yes, mine too. But I want it black on the outside, black on the inside with blue neon lights.
Oh, all right. I can do that.
Four, favorite food.
Pizza.
Five, if you could have anything in the world and money was no option, what would it be?
A child of my own.
Okay. Six. Ooh, that's a good one. Superpower. What's your dream superpower?
To fly.
What? I dig it. Six. No, yeah. We're on 6. 7.
Mhm.
Okay. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, what would it be?
Take more risks.
Ooh, okay. 8. If you were a fly on the wall, what conversation would you like to eavesdrop in?
The conversation my parents had on their first date.
Ooh, that's a little risky, but okay.
Yeah.
9. Okay. Imagine that you had X amount of dollars and you could only travel to one place in the world and you may not be able to go back home. Where would that be?
May not be able to go back home. That got me. I was about to spit out Antarctica because one place my wife and I have never been, but we can't come back home. Oh man. I'm gonna say Italy.
Italy. Okay. Now, number 10, you could pass or play. So if you play, I ask you one more question. If you pass, you can ask me a question that you want to know about me.
Ooh, okay.
What are we doing? Are we passing or playing?
Oh, I got to choose right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play. I want to play.
Okay.
I like this. This is fun.
So question number 10. If you could go back and recreate your wedding day, would you do something different?
Yes, I would do something different. Do you want to know what it is?
Yes.
Yes. I would actually have spent more time taking pictures.
Oh,
And I know
yes.
that sounds nuts because a lot of people say, oh, a picture of my face is tired from smiling. But I felt like when we were taking pictures at our wedding, we were kind of like rushed to get to the reception. and maybe the timing was right. And there's a lot of things that we wish we still had pictures of. And we were actually, my wife and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. It's funny you asked that question. So it would be actually take more pictures.
And pictures are worth 1,000 words. Like we have a ton of pictures, but I also made my husband spring for a videographer because I wanted the video too.
Oh yeah, yeah. My father-in-law was our videographer, so it's not professional, but he got some good stuff.
That is awesome. Thanks for playing rapid fire. Now let's dive into learning more about how you overcame and kicked the big C in the butt. And for y'all listening, the big C is cancer. And we're going to learn the type of cancer that you had. We're going to put some context around that and how that has helped you in the philanthropy and giving journey you're on now.
Awesome.
So let's start off by telling us what was the type of cancer that you were diagnosed with and what are some of the symptoms of that cancer? Because I always like to be educational so the listeners and viewers know what to go research, what to look out for if maybe someone in their family is going through something similar, or how to be an advocate.
I love that question and the way you framed it, because I think it's very, very important that we are educational. It's great to have a nice story. And my story is unique. I understand that, but it's also important to make sure that people are learning something from it. And I really do appreciate that. I'll also say that, we're going to get a little bit more into my story here. It's very hard. The one thing that you can't do is compare different people's journeys and the struggles and the pains and the things they've had. Everyone's got their own mountain to climb, if you will. Mine happened to be from a physical illness, perspective, but it could be anything. And so for me, when you talk about how I got diagnosed, kind of a unique scenario, and we can dive more into that whole story. But ultimately, I was in training camp as a freshman in college playing football. And I had what I thought was a groin pull. My trainers thought I pulled my groin. I was doing all kinds of rehab exercises. So if you're asking for symptoms and how it all came about, it was basically like I had a sore muscle and I just couldn't run or move as a young athlete would like to. And I didn't think anything of it, didn't think it was anything serious whatsoever. And one thing led to another. And before you know it, it turned out to be testicular cancer. And it had spread up into my abdomen, and there were some lymph nodes involved. So it was quite complicated, but it started out as testicular.
So when it started off as testicular cancer and you originally thought it was a groin pull, did you tell any of the males in your family to see if they had experienced this type of cancer? Because, sometimes with men, and this is not to dunk on men, sometimes they don't like to talk about certain things that are going on with their body. And I feel if we were to engage in those conversations, we could actually help another male in our family be preventative.
Mm-hmm. Great perspective. The answer to the question is no. Other than, hey, Dad, I pulled my groin, so the trainers got me doing all these exercises. I tend to not fall into that category, believe it or not. My wife thinks I probably talk too much. I'm willing to share what's going on with me. I'm glad I have in my life, or else I might not even be here. But I told the trainers and everything, I guess there were other males, but they weren't part of my family. They were honestly didn't even know them that well. I just met them because I was a freshman. And, training camp is an intense thing. If anyone out there who's played any sport for that matter, but football specifically, and back then, 20 years ago, training camp was a little bit more intense. I hate to be the old school guy, but the rules are a little bit different now. We were practicing 2 and 3 times a day, and we were straining our body. So it was natural to have muscular injuries. And so it wasn't that painful. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, guys, I'm an extreme plan. I can't do anything. It was like, hey, this feels kind of weird. It's kind of limiting. And they, to their credit, they said, well, let's not injure it anymore. I know it's important that you play and prove yourself as a freshman, but you got to take care of yourself. So they kind of sat me down pretty early in the process, but it wasn't getting any better. No matter all the I would do this rehab exercise. Really funny, actually. I was on a 3-wheeled stool. Picture a stool that it's got wheels on. You could slide back and forth. Now, a high school training room, there's like a couple people in there. Maybe it's a 10 by 10 room. My high school our training room was not extravagant whatsoever. When I got to college, it's a massive room. I mean, it's 25, 30 yards long and another 20 wide. And there's 100 people in there at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning during training camp. And so my one of my rehab drills was to shimmy myself across the length of this room, dodging people just out of necessity. And that was part of the exercise. And so you can picture me doing this, but in like grimacing while I'm doing this. And I felt like, but after I was doing that for a couple of days, I was like, man, I've mastered the art of doing this and I'm not getting any better. So something's wrong. So I actually told the trainer, and he stood up in the middle. Picture this. He stood up in the middle of this. He's a little guy. He gets probably 5'8", not if not shorter than that, small guy. He used to stand up on this little box to get everyone's attention if something needed to be done. And I don't, maybe it's just my imagination, but the whole room got quiet. And he's yelling across the room. He's standing on this box. He's like, they call me Bobby. He's like, Bobby, what are you doing? You need to get back on the field. And when the little trainer kind of criticizes you, it's a shot to your ego, talk about like, men not wanting to be belittled. And for a minute, I was like determined that I was going to get back on the field, but then I said, you know what, there's something wrong. I said, Rick, you don't understand. And we actually had a more serious conversation, and he sent me to some doctors. And that's when the process got started. But it's really interesting what you say. You never know. Like, I just thought it was a little minor muscle pull. And it goes to show you just get checked out, whatever, if it's something that's unique and it's new to you, just get it checked out, especially if you have a history in your family. And we didn't have a testicular cancer history, but we had a cancer history in my family.
Okay. And thank you for elaborating on that. And I'm glad that he sent you to other doctors to some doctors to get it checked out. And then that's whenever you began the workup and et cetera. So whenever you were diagnosed with testicular cancer, at what stage did they catch it?
It's interesting they say that. So 20 years ago, the way they didn't really describe it via stages, or either that or my doctor didn't want to scare me. I actually sat down. So this is another interesting part of the story. It was a Thursday afternoon. My parents had already booked this flight to come up to New York. We're from South Florida, and they were going to stay with my uncle and his family who lives near, not too far from where I went to college. And the doctor sat me down. So my parents were flying up this day. Now they knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point, but they were still going to come up to see me because they hadn't seen me. I hadn't been away from home my whole life that long, a month or whatever it was. So they came up, and the day that they were flying in was the day I had this appointment with my first appointment with the oncologist. And he sat me, excuse me, not the oncologist, the urologist. And he sat me down, and that's when he told me, you have cancer. He said, Bobby, you have cancer. And like my mind was like it just exploded. I was not expecting this. It was just, I couldn't believe he told me this. And the timing was impeccable. I left that appointment. I mean, I was with him for maybe 10 minutes tops. That was pretty much it. I waited for 45 minutes, sat down with him, told me I had cancer, walked outside, and the phone rang. My parents had just landed, and they were on their way in the car to my uncle's house. And my mom was like, oh, hey, how'd the doctor's appointment go? And I mean, I had to tell her. So I was like, so mama, they said I have cancer. And I could just feel like the air in the car, like the car deflated. My mom was like, what? And my dad is on the other end. And I could hear him going, Susan, my mom's name is Susan. What's wrong? Like, he knew something was wrong too. And it was just, I mean, it was unbelievably surprising moment and just shocking moment in our lives. And so we went back. I saw them. I hadn't seen them in a month. And I just got diagnosed, and we sat at my uncle's kitchen table there and shed some tears. And it was unbelievable. It was really shocking.
Wow. But I'm glad that, the day that you got diagnosed, that you did have that support system, because think about how many people are diagnosed and they don't have the support system. They don't have the sounding board for someone to walk through their diagnosis with. And I think whenever you have a support system, it actually helps you beat cancer and heal a little bit quicker, because you feel that love and you have people that are cheering for you and pushing you whenever you may not feel like pushing yourself.
Agreed. I got stories about that too. So I 100% agree. The support system I had, I wouldn't be here today without them.
And when you think about how the cancer spread to your abdomen, were you doing chemo, radiation, or what led to the cancer spreading, or was it just very aggressive?
So when I was diagnosed, you asked about what stage, and I really didn't answer that question. Forgive me, but I'll kind of, in a roundabout way, answer it right now. So my doctor didn't give me a stage, but he did say it was extremely aggressive. And if they wouldn't have caught it, I mean, it could have been months and I would be gone, but it was also extremely curable. he knew the exact type of cancer it was. And he said, we can beat this, 99% confident that you'll be fine. But I'm really glad we caught it, and we have to be super aggressive with our treatment. And so I had surgery the original surgery to remove what was there, like the source. And then I had to go through chemo. I didn't do any radiation. He said, it's in a lot of places, radiation's very targeted. We need to hit the whole body. So he gave me some pretty intense chemo over a few month period. And it was rough. Obviously, anyone who's been through chemo would know this. And especially 20 years ago, the drugs weren't the same, but it was surgery and then just pretty intense chemo. And it was tough, even for someone, you think you're invincible at 18. I thought I was on top of the world, and it was a talk about kicking the butt. Cancer kicked my butt, or at least the treatments did for a little bit there. And I ended up kicking cancer's butt, but it was a long road.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that he knew exactly what type of cancer was. He was spot on the treatment plan, and then you kick cancers. But because sometimes people have to go through various trials in order to beat cancer, and whenever you go through those trials, it really takes a toll on your body. You lose your hair. My cousin who's going through cancer right now, her fingernails have turned black and dark. There's so many different things, but everyone's body is going to react differently, and that's why I asked that question, because I want to put context around it in case anyone knows someone who's going through testicular cancer, or maybe even prostate cancer too, because they're kind of in the same family in a sense. And so now, how did you get into the philanthropy work that you're doing, and then just the overall of giving back? Because I'm sure after you went through it, you processed what was happening to you. You said, you know what, I need to share my testimony with some other people, and I need to share how I overcame this. So walk us through your philanthropy journey.
I will. So if I can pick up where I left off, actually in the story, it'll flow right into it. So that was the Thursday that happened. And like I said, I was this invincible kid, thought I was going to go take on the world, play football, get an education, who knows, go to the NFL. If I wasn't going to play sports, I was going to talk about it. I thought I was going to be a broadcaster. And that Saturday, so just a couple of days after I was diagnosed, my uncle's best friend came over to the house where we were at. That was the day that my team was playing their first game. I wasn't there, obviously, and we were actually watching it. And then he came over, and he was only there for 15 minutes, but he introduced himself to my parents. Now, we lived in Florida, so we didn't know this guy. And he handed his keys to my parents, and he said, "Bob and Susan, I can't imagine what you're going through with your son. Take my car. I know you're not from here. Use it for whatever you need, as long as you could possibly need it to go to all the doctor's appointments, whatever you need to take care of your son." And my parents were blown away by this man's generosity. We'd never met him before. And he's basically giving them his car. And he left. That was it. We said, "Oh, nice to meet you, Tim." And he said goodbye to my uncle, and he left. And we're like, wow. We said to my uncle, like, "Man, that guy's really nice. How generous was that?" And he goes, "That's just Tim. That's Tim. He's one of the most generous people I know." I said, "Oh, it's amazing." So my doctor, speaking of that treatment plan, the first thing I had to do before I started my chemotherapy treatment, I had to do some sperm banking, because the doctor knew that I would be infertile. And this is part of the reason why I referenced to having a child of my own earlier. As a result of my chemotherapy and the type of cancer I had, we've been unable to have children. So he knew this. So I had a couple of days before I would actually start treatment, but he told me, "You can't not do anything. Like, you have to keep your mind active while you're going through all of this. So don't drop all of your college classes. Maybe drop a few, because you don't want too much of a load, but still go to class." So that following Tuesday, I went to my second ever college class, and I came out of my second ever college class. I'm like, "Oh, cool. I'm a college student now." And I went to the cafeteria, and I was going to get something to eat. Now, I don't know if you remember those tube-like televisions, Genesis, that like they would hang from a bracket, like in the corner of a public place, or even in your house if you had that.
They're
And
kind of like big, right? Like the big block
it
ones.
must have been 8-10 inches, like tiny little TV. I'm sitting there eating like a breakfast burrito or something. I don't know. I'm watching. Now, my college is Hofstra University, so I'm on Long Island, New York. I'm watching the news, and I'm sitting there, and I don't normally watch the news. especially in New York. I don't even know what the channels are. I just moved up there, and I'm eating my burrito, and all of a sudden a plane hits the Twin Towers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So I called my dad and I'm like, hey, Dad, you watching? Do you see this? He goes, yeah, I just saw this plane. We're talking for like a minute or whatever. Bam, another plane comes around, hits the other Twin Tower. And we're like, oh, what is going on here? What's going on in the world? So he's like, you better come back to your uncle's house immediately. So I don't even know if I finished a burrito. I hopped in the car and I'm in New York City. I'm not in New York City, but I'm on Long Island. And in the distance, I can see the towers burn. I mean, it's just incredible what you can see from that distance. And normally it would take me 15 minutes to drive from my uncle's house to school or back. It took me 9 hours. Now, I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism. I thought I was going to work in radio for the rest of my life. I will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again in my life. But I did that day. And I listened to the whole thing, watching it in the distance as I drove. And I ran out of gas in my uncle's neighborhood. We pushed my car into his driveway, went in the house, found out that he didn't make it home from business in Denver the night before. And my aunt is beside herself because he was supposed to fly to New York. And it was crazy for a while there. Finally, he calls us that evening, like maybe 8 o'clock or something. And he's like, hey, I'm okay. I'm stuck in Denver. The phones have been out. I know you've probably been nervous, but I'm fine. But he said, unfortunately, Tim, his best friend, was in the towers and he perished. And we all looked at each other and were like, wow, that is, I mean, terribly tragic, sad, unbelievable. We just met this guy. He completed the most generous act for us that we've ever had before. And he lost his life in the towers. And part of the reason why he lost his life is because the firm that he worked for, Cantor Fitzgerald, would donate, speaking of generosity, office space to my uncle's foundation that supports cystic fibrosis, which is a respiratory, an immune disorder that my cousin suffers from. And so here's this guy, Tim, who's one of the most generous people that we ever met. He's a higher up in this company that donates space to a nonprofit organization, and he lost his life. And it was terribly sad, but it always stuck in my mind that he didn't know who we were at all, but he was willing to be generous to us in such a short notice. And it took me years. You read in the introduction, it took me years to wrap my head around the emotions behind this, even though it only took 20 rounds of chemo and 3 or 4 months to recover physically. But it took me years emotionally. And I've determined in my life, because of that generosity is not complicated. Generosity is not something that we need to think about too much. I mean, if it's financial generosity, sure, there's a good way to do it. And that's the world I work in. We can talk more about that too. But generosity as a concept and a lifestyle can be very, very simple. It can be as simple as opening a door for someone. You can change their world. And, Tim, his legacy will always be part of my work. And I had a chance to talk to his kids about it, who were super young at the time when that all happened. But more recently, my cousin got married and we were all there reminiscing about this. And I actually got to tell them. And it's really interesting how people can do the smallest things but make the biggest difference. So generosity is really important in my life. And I think about this all the time. And so that's how it really ties in.
Wow. So what I was going to say, because I want you to say the last sentence that you said again, because I think it's really going to drive home. And I think part of it cut out because the internet speed. So I want you to say how generosity and how the last impact whenever your cousin got married and you had the ability to share the story with your cousin and Tim's kids.
Sure. So Kim's kids were just babies. There's 3 of them when this all happened. My cousin got married. So we're talking about 20 years later now. He got married this past summer and they were all at the wedding with their mom too, by the way, Tim's wife. And I got a chance to actually speak with them a little bit more about that. I had seen them off and on at family functions in between them, but I actually got a chance to really talk specifically with one of his daughters for a while about the whole situation, because she heard a podcast episode of mine and actually asked me about it. And I'm really glad she did, because we went into a little bit more detail. And being able to express to them how generous their father was so meaningful for them too, but for me for sure, because I really wanted them to understand that about how his radical generosity, and that's why I use the word radical, because radical is something else that I think people can misinterpret at times too. But his generosity was radical because most people, just about everyone else in my life at that time that I knew, would not have thought to just give someone their car. I mean, that's just almost silly, no matter how in need somebody is, to just give them a $30,000 or 20, however much. I mean, believe me, it wasn't like a lousy car either. He had a solid job. So it was a pretty expensive vehicle that he just said, here, take it. And that's radical. It's something that other people would think is crazy. Like, why would you even do that? And so to be able to tell his kids that was super powerful in my life.
That's amazing. And I'm glad that he left such an imprint on you and it drove the impact that you are making today. And that, his kids got to hear it from your perspective, even though their dad is gone, but what he did will always live on, because how many people can say, I actually, gave somebody my car because he saw the need that your family and you were in. And he wanted to make sure that he can help you all out because he had the means necessary to do it. And that is, being a servant leader, that's having generosity, but you never know how, small acts or random acts of kindness, how it can shape and mold someone's world.
I completely agree. It's the little things. Generosity is not complicated, but it should be intentional.
And when you think about the overall work that you're doing, Bob, with day in and day out, and you have your site, Bob DePasquale, and you're connecting with other people, what are some of the core values that you focus on?
My personal values are integrity, honesty, faith, and generosity. Those are the things that are really important in my life with my family and in my professional work. And so you mentioned my website, bobdepasquale.com. You can connect with me there. You can find information, all the things that I'm doing on the personal side. But it's really important to me, and you mentioned this in the introduction too, I believe everyone has gifts and skills to make the world a better place. And it's about the rest of us giving each other the opportunity to do that. And so part of generosity is not only giving to people, it's not necessarily giving them monetary things or possessions, but it's giving them opportunity to express the human need and desire to care. I think compassion is highly underrated in our society. And so a lot of the work that I do, or not even work per se, but a lot of the passion projects and a lot of the speaking engagements that I've had the honor to share with people about is about that, about allowing people the opportunity to be the caring human beings that we're created to be.
Amazing. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because it definitely doesn't go unnoticed. And Bob, as we wind down, I want you to leave the listeners and viewers with your call to action for this segment.
Yes. So you can go to bobdepasquale.com. You can pick up my initiatives for impact, just a couple things that you can use to kind of trigger those positive generosity moments in your life. And then my professional site, initiateimpact.com. We work with philanthropic families to manage their wealth and finances so that they can make the biggest impact that they want to and are capable of in the world. And so you can go there and you can pick up our ebook on that process. So thank you for having me at Genesis. It's been really cool to talk about these things. It's quite a story that I've told many times, but each time the questions that I get make it a deeper understanding for me. So you've really provided me with other reflection time that I'm going to have now after we close out this call. So thank you.
My pleasure. And I'm glad that I was able to challenge you and just ask those questions. And Bob, for those who are on social media platforms, are you on any mainstream social media platforms that you would like to plug your handles?
Yes. So BDEPA. So just my first initial and the first four letters of my name. BDEPA is my Instagram and my Twitter handle. Those are the best places to get a hold of me. I'm pretty active. I host Twitter spaces, social audio rooms. I'm also on LinkedIn at Bob DePasquale. So check me out there. DMs are always open. Love to hear from people and love to talk about radical generosity.
And there you have it, listeners and viewers of Gems Podcast. The guest, once again, is Bob DePasquale. All of his contact information will be in the show notes, so make sure you scroll down and connect with him. And I challenge you to ask what your family history is. Is there anyone in your family that was diagnosed with any form of cancer? And if so, what form of cancer was it? What age were they when they were diagnosed, and did they survive or not? And how can you go get tested for those things just so you could get ahead of the curve rather than being in the thick of things? Having a courageous conversation as well as a necessary conversation is definitely going to help promote that overall longevity. I also challenge you to plug in with some of the local organizations and support people who are going throughout their cancer journey, whether it's making them care packages, whether it's going to sit with them in chemo or whatever. Some people need a support system and they may not have family, but you can be that person to have that saving grace and show them compassion. And remember, a smile goes a long way. You never know how your smile can illuminate someone's day. So I challenge you to go connect with someone in your community today and really be a servant leader. Don't forget to subscribe and share this segment. We're on 40 plus platforms, and also connect with me on YouTube at Gems with Genesis Amaris Kemp for all things video content. And lastly, but not least, we're looking for brand sponsors to continue the mission of Gems Podcast, which is to educate, inspire, and motivate while we connect the dots with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We're currently ranked in the top 3% globally out of 2.8 million podcasts per www.listennotes.com. So you can find out more information about becoming a sponsor by heading on over to genesisamariscamp.net. And until next time, peace, love, and lots of blessings. Go take the challenge and be great.